All right, good morning for June 17, 2022. This is Low Code Campfire number 55, which I have imaginatively named Open Lines Friday. This is our Low Code Campfire as an opportunity to get together with the community, to share techniques, challenges, experiences, and just what's going on your projects. Maybe sometimes get some good help with it. All these hour-long editions are posted to the Low Code Campfire channel on our YouTube channel, youtube.com/plantanap. So you should subscribe and listen to all that stuff. I think we're up to several weeks worth of content out there. So if you're really looking for something to go to sleep by, that'd be a good spot to start. Today, we'll keep our normal agenda, which we'll say hello, and then in no particular order, first call we'll do, but then in no particular order, we'll talk about contributions to our website, feature requests, submitted stories, ghost stories, and I think I've even added dark corners to the list, so maybe we'll get to that one too. If you've got noise going on behind you, I encourage you to mute. You can submit questions and topics in advance. That link is in the emails that we send you, and this QR code will get you there as well. You can also comment on the host and how well he performs his duties there. So with that, good morning, hello.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Lots of the regular people are here today. Anybody who's new, please do make sure you say hello. And Jerry, I'm very glad to see you here. I was concerned about you surviving your weekend.
You're on mute, Jerry.
Okay, thank you, Dale. I appreciate noticing the pain that I went through.
You look none the worse for wear. If anybody didn't know, Jerry did a race this last weekend on is it an antique or a classic? What do you call it?
Well, I guess the best way to describe it, at least the way they describe it, is a vintage motocross bike.
Vintage.
Vintage was the word they used. Oddly enough, it was a bike that I had raced as a kid back in the glory days of the beginnings of motocross in the United States, and apparently it's still a thing. And people go out and find these old bikes, fix them up, and race them. And finally, the national championship had come to my part of the world. So I thought, okay, maybe this is the year I'll partake, and I did.
Well, good. It was good to read the stories, but good that you survived the experience. I know I've never raced those. I like bikes, but racing never was on the list for me.
Understood.
So
I can assure you I was the only person on the starting line that could probably talk vintage motorcycles and Plantanap at the same time.
We all, yes, there are oddities in the world. Absolutely.
Yes.
Extremes, polar extremes. Okay.
Glad to be back.
Good deal. First call. What's on your mind? Anybody have an issue you want to bring to front and center right away?
Wow, we must be doing really good.
All right.
Must be time for a new release. We're out of bugs and stuff.
Yes, well, it is time for a new release. That's one of the things on my list to talk about today. Let's see. I'll do one. I wanted to call out since David Osborne is in the meeting today. This week we held an event, a webinar. The sales team pressed me into service, and we talked about how low code, no code, full code can work together. And David represented full code in that discussion, and I just appreciate so much that he participated and gave of his hour. But also Jeff Vance, who sometimes comes to these as well. I know Jeff is off today, but so I just wanted to thank you, David, for participating in that. The sales team was all very happy that we got such great quotes from you. Can't coax him off mute.
Oh, I had to find the mute button, no, the unmute button. No, it was a good time. If you want to meet up next week, I can, put out a bunch of complaints about the software as well too, so that it doesn't seem like it's all one-sided.
I'm sorry, David. I'm having a hard time hearing you. Yeah. Thanks.
I'll take that good migration script.
Yes. Yep, that's a good one. Well, it's on the list with migration script. Okay. So nobody with any issues.
I wouldn't go that far.
Okay. All right. Well, I'm gonna.
Everyone has issues.
I'm gonna go on to some pre-prepared topics. Maybe I can provoke you into talking. So these are the things on Wednesday, Low Code Cafe, I talked about or demonstrated a couple of screens worth of things that are coming in the next release, version 1.21. We are working furiously behind the scenes to achieve code freeze on that. But we want to make sure we get everything in before we do that. At which time our normal cycle is to go into beta test for a period of time, and lots of you participate in that. I guess this would be a great time to say, anybody who's not part of beta test that would like to be, it's a great time. You could message me your email address, and we would evaluate you for suitability to be part of the program. Typically, if your reflection shows in a mirror, you can probably get signed up for the beta test program, but it is an opportunity to get a hold of the software early. And so if you were not part of that and want to be, we would appreciate it. But anything on this list that you'd be interested in talking about or seeing more of? The biggest part of what we did, I think that in the overall story of Plant and App is the ability to export and import entities. And this is part of our story where we want to support the scenario where you have multiple copies of the software, a development environment, maybe a staging environment going on to production. And so our end game is that you'll be able to, with the use of a Git repository, transfer information from lower environments to higher environments. But as part of getting there, we have a long way to go. Part of getting there, the first thing that was not able to be exported and imported was the definition of entities. And so we're making our first round at that, and I demonstrated that on Wednesday. So that's part of Low Code Cafe. You could see it there, but any questions about any of these things that might be in 1.21?
I'll tell you, Bill, I watched this yesterday, I think, and I got really excited when I saw the entity export because we just had to recreate stuff manually in production the other day. We actually don't use a ton of entities because we already had an existing system with a lot of database structure already there. So we're starting to use entities. But yeah, then I caught in your video that anyone who was on pre like 1.17, the IDs are different, and so there's going to be a migration script coming at some time. I'm not going to make you stick to a date, but is it actively getting worked on, this migration script, or should I not hold my breath?
So I can give two answers to that, perhaps a little contradictory. We've known we've had to do the migration script since we did that, and it has been pushed back. It is currently slated for 1.22, the next release. So typically, if we keep to schedule, our release pace is 6 weeks. So in 6 weeks, potentially it could come out as a hotfix, but I suspect it won't. So 6 weeks from when we start on 1.22.
All right, that's awesome. And then that presumably is going to solve all of the issues I run into, probably with exporting and importing and the IDs not matching up between systems and causing a bit of gray hair.
Yes. To just touch on that one at a very high level, the all of the various content in Plantain app was originally handled, I think it was by integer module IDs or integer IDs. So that's how we identify it and made the uniqueness was IDs. When you, so for example, your first flow was workflow number 1. And then if you try to export that and import it into another system, the alternate system might have already had 5 workflows. So now the ID is in conflict with the one that was there. So overall, and I don't know for sure that it was workflows, but certainly automation jobs fell into this category where they had IDs. I think workflows were part of it as well. So our overall strategy then is that we're using GUIDs. What does that stand for? Geographically unique. It's supposed to be guaranteed unique IDs. They're big and long and guarantee uniqueness. And so we're now identifying things by GUIDs. And so when you transfer things between systems, it'll solve it. So that's the slightly longer explanation. The answer to your question is yes, it will cover that as well.
And then I'm gathering that the long-term or very, very long-term roadmap is that the moving of things between systems is going to be maybe not one click, but it's basically you're going to be exporting or setting stuff up to Git and maybe be able to really easily import that stuff into another production system, and it's a lot more hands-off. Is that what I'm gathering in the very long term?
Yeah, so I'm gonna I see Patrick is off mute and he'll probably back me up or contradict me, but the idea is that in the lower environment, you'll be able to designate things that are supposed to go into the Git repository. And so with a set of clicks, be able to push things into that repository. And then you or whoever is responsible for the higher environment could then incorporate them from that repository into a higher environment. So there'll be and I get stuck on the terminology, but there'll be a push from the lower environment and a pull into the higher environment. So there's not automatically moving in one step, but in very defined steps. Did I get that anywhere close to reality, Patrick?
Yeah, I think so. So the goal is really that you can select a set of objects that are part of a functionality or change or improvement that you're making, and package those together and push them into the other environment. That's the goal that we're aiming for. And this entity export is one of the main things we needed to work on to start getting there. And so
that's awesome. Anything that makes the mundane tasks easier is great. I'm also, I don't want to eat up all the time. I'm kind of curious, is my setup unique in the fact that we've got multiple environments, or is it fairly common? I'm just wondering who else is on the call, if they're actually working in setups where they have staging environment or a dev environment and a production environment, or if people mostly just are with one environment and build their stuff and stick at that, make it easier that way.
I have both.
Yeah, ditto. I have both as well.
I'll speak for Plantain app. We use both scenarios as well.
Yep.
Excellent. That's just all I was curious about.
And I, in my previous position with a different company, we had a very clear delineation of development, staging, and production as well.
Jim, it looked like you had a thought.
Well, yeah, I had a question. Yes, we use multiple developments where possible. Sometimes it's too much trouble for a quick change. But for Patrick's question on the Git push, can we infer that there might be an option to have an item go to 2 different Git repositories? You could have a general overall system Git backup and link this item to a different type of Git repository, into a different Git repository as a part of a project or package.
I'm not sure about that. I don't know, Dale, if you have other thoughts, but I'm not
Well-
sure we're thinking that direction.
We haven't so we haven't envisioned that case. So I'd like to explore that a little bit, Jim. I'm thinking that if you remember how we're currently defining, I mean, you can define a Git connector in Plant an App. And then those things go there. It's an interesting thought that okay, in our current implementation, if you use the Git connector, everything goes. The theory is, the design was that everything that you're doing in your implementation goes into the Git repository. I say it that way because there's a bug that sometimes blocks that from working as it's designed. But as we go into, and so there, the intention is that there's one Git repository.
And it's immediate. That's the other distinction.
Yes.
Yes, when you make the change, the Git is updated.
Currently.
Yeah, right.
In our next implementation, it's going to be defined. You'll have to pick what you want to go into it and click. That's the plan. I don't know exactly what that UI will look like. That's the plan. But it's interesting that we could potentially define multiple Git connectors, and you could choose which one to push it to. Would is
And
that,
I would like to push it to multiple if we're picking, if you're going to turn an item on and off for a Git repository, I would say I have a Git repository that's my total system backup, that I want to back that up to Git. And then I have a customer pick a customer scheduling module that these items are customer scheduling that I want to put to a different Git repository and push out on the schedule or as a release to a different Git repository, and then be able to import that customer scheduling to another system.
So are they ultimately targeted towards the same production system or different production systems?
Towards different production systems.
Oh.
So yeah, so that my customer scheduling module could be in, I can put it into the module. I can import that as a feature into another system where needed and have all the current components. I mean, that leads towards the idea of putting things to the marketplace, that has been talked about for a while, which is, okay, let's package up these 10 components and give it a name in a Git repository, but I still want the overall Git repository where things are going and backed up.
So first I would say, Jim, I think it's very timely that you talk about that. We haven't gotten into defining or at least any development on what that experience is going to be. And so just kind of opening the possibility of having X number of repositories connected instead of one defined repository is kind of interesting. I think it might.
I mean, I would like, some sort of, if we define multiple connectors to get multiple, and then be able to have a drop-down list or a set of checkboxes that this object, when that, beyond the initial hold that's running with every backup, schedule or have a job that rebuilds the secondary repositories, with current stuff.
So I'll just say Bogdan has some pretty strong ideas about the way that that's going to be designed, and we'll bring that. And then when we get to that spot, we'll probably plan a campfire discussion around it again for to pick up these kind of ideas and talk about the use cases. So A, we'll plant the seed, and B, we'll probably come back around to it again at the right time. Anybody else this sounds something like something that you would use multiple repositories.
Yeah, I think for going back to the original point about production development environments, when I, in the previous job at Strathclyde, we had, like other people have said, do have a mix, and had a workflow which moved environments from development to production, which I've talked about before. For this one about the Git repositories, I think it really fits. It makes most sense in this idea of having packaged functionality that can be shipped around to an arbitrary number of production environments, and thinking of that as separate from the existing GitHub connector, which is, as Jim says, it's really your backup. It's preserving the evolution of the state of your current environment, rather than being something that you ultimately take that whole system back up and then push it to production. So I think really we have to flesh out a bit more about what functionality or what packages of functionality or features are going to look like, because I can imagine as you've got a development environment, and within that you're building a packaged feature, you might, or a number of packaged features, you might have some entities or some workflows which are common to several packaged features that you're developing. So you're going to need to, when you bundle the collection of components together into a packaged feature, you may find that you're going to have to map certain items to several of these packages.
So our initial design, and this is going to be an evolution, obviously.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah, and our initial thought is that you package things together so they become a pull request, basically, that you're requesting be pulled into the production environment, and initially, so we're going to initially we're not going to handle conflict resolution. We're going to tell you there's a conflict and that you need to fix it. That's the initial idea. Did I get that right, Dale?
Yep.
Yeah. So so I think that what you're talking about is that you have the potential to have conflicts in that scenario where you're pulling like the same entity into two different pull requests. Then there's the potential for a conflict there, and initially what we're going to do is tell you that the conflict exists and that you need to go resolve the conflict.
No, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Sounds good.
And kind of repeating back what I'm hearing, part of what I'm hearing is that you're thinking that each element of the solution would be designated as part of one or more packages.
I think from a development point of view, that would be the simplest. Otherwise, because having dabbled in traditional DNN module development, you almost need to create a clean instance in which to develop this standalone module. And if you're producing it for a general marketplace, okay, that's tenable. But when you're building a number of similar features, it becomes a bit onerous to have to maintain distinct development environments to produce one per feature. Obviously, if technically, I suppose technically it makes more sense to do that because you get a nice clean separation. But I can imagine a scenario where you have your development environment and your production environment. And what we're really wanting to do is have the development environment largely similar to the production environment. And as bits of functionality, new bits of functionality are developed, or existing bits of functionality are enhanced, we wanted to package that together, take it out of the development environment, and then drop it into production. And I think there you may find that these new and updated pieces of functionality are going to rely on common pieces of, common entities, common workflows, things that have been designated as another cluster of components or that make up a feature.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
I think, yeah, so it's obviously, but I'm just thinking about that. So let's just say, Jim, that that an existing workflow is being pulled it's been pulled into one package that's already gone to production, and now it's being pulled into another package. Are you envisioning that there's been a change to that workflow, or it's just being pulled in to be used in this new functionality package?
I think if we're thinking of a scenario where you're using your development environment to iterate on your main production environment, I think both situations are possible.
Sure.
And I think we've almost got three different use cases. One is you've got your development environment entirely separate and you're recreating. You've got this idea of the solutions marketplace, where I, as a solution developer, create something that is entirely freestanding, sits in a marketplace and can be used by anyone, a bit like a DNN module. But then we've got this sort of hybrid model, which goes back to the problem that all of us are facing, which is where we have our development environment and our production environment, and getting updates and new functionality from development into production often means recreating it. And it's in that third one where you're probably going to be referencing things that you've already created that may or may not be enhanced as part of the new functionality.
Yeah. So I mean, I would say that I think our intention is, and Dale, please correct me if I'm wrong, is that when you're selecting, where we're headed is that when you're selecting the objects that you're going to put into a package, you're going to see a list of things that have changes. So if a workflow hasn't had a change, then it won't be listed and it can be referenced by your package. But if there has been a change, then it will be listed and you can include it in the package. And then when you're pulling it into the production site, then there would be a check for any conflicts that exist. And if there are conflicts that exist, you'd be notified.
Yeah,
I think that's where we're headed. Does that make sense, what I just said?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think our original direction, again, kind of to expand on that a little bit, it was more about saying, exactly, picking the things that have changed and moving them along to the next environment, which is more about an event that happens at the time that you want to push it to the next environment. As compared to what I heard, both Jims talking is more along the lines of designating things, components to be part of packages along the way, so that now you can refer to a package and build.
Right. Yeah. So there's that too. Yeah. If you're doing like the marketplace thing and you haven't made a change to a workflow, but it's part of the functionality, it needs to be included. So yeah.
Yeah, and we were always talking about allowing the developer to pick which items would go into which would be packaged, but we were going to assist that by talking in terms of what's been modified. I think, anyway, I think it's useful that we've had the discussion, and we'll bring that into our product team as we advance to the next level of this, or to that when we get to that level. But I think we should put a pin in it and say, okay, when we developed a plan, let's bring it back here and bounce it for these other scenarios. Make sure we're hitting the mark that you guys would use it for. So, good discussion. By, I don't know, show of hands, if you want to, who is using the Git and the Git connector now to back up their instances? Do we have people on the call that are using that?
I am using it, but it fails a lot on me.
Yep. that was really the next part of my question. Are you solving that? Do you know how to solve it? And
The only solution that I found so far was the one that you had initially given me, which is to erase what's on your local system to kind of reset it. But doing that wipes out your Git completely and you lose all your history. So that wasn't really a solution. So I just basically gave up on it. I mean, it's still connected, but every time I save anything, I'm just getting errors in my error log saying that Git's not working.
Yep.
You know, I get the same thing.
Yep. Well, so I wanted to point out, and as you say, you lose your history, but if anybody's relying on that for a backup, it's almost certainly, I don't know what the thing is that triggers it, but there's a very good chance that it's not sending every change to the repository. The solution that's been referred to in removing a folder from the from the plant and app implementation triggers it to resend everything. So at least everything in that case would get backed up, and perhaps the history isn't right. But if you're relying on it for the purposes of a backup, and I would advise that you check to make sure that it is working. And then if you want help, I can be happy to show you what to delete so that it re-triggers that. Alternately, you might rely on some other form of backup. I just wanted to caution, if anybody's relying on that as a backup, it may not be doing what you expect.
Is there a way to get the backup, see the Git backup to not do it on every save, that we could just, once a day schedule something? I mean, that would be good for my type of backup I'm doing with it now, since Git isn't working properly.
No.
No.
As far as I know, the mechanism just is what it is. It's trying to send everything every time you change it, and it has broken functionality, so that once it starts to fail, it continuously fails. I hate to say that on a recorded channel, but that is what it is, and I just don't want anybody to be relying on it for a backup and get caught with it. Okay, so anything else in this list? We demonstrated flow wait, adding a sleep or a no op kind of a delay feature. Anybody see any use for that in their world?
I could see using it with the wait. I wondered if there was a way to tie it to an event of any type.
Sorry, tie it to a what?
Any type of other event, have it, sort of a pause along the way until, do this until a database insert happens or a secondary trigger happens.
So at this point, I mean, it's just a hard-coded delay. It's only about time and no other events.
Which I can see a use for. In some designs, I end up splitting workflows just to make sure, okay, I got to, it made it through to this. I now have to wait for step B to complete. And I don't know how long that'll take.
Yep.
So I split the workflow, and it's like, if I could have a secondary trigger or watch of some type to watch for something, then.
Yeah, and I think one thing that occurs to me is that you could certainly put in a loop that included waits that would, an execute actions kind of a loop and have it sit and wait until so you could use the wait to delay and then check to see if the thing happened and then loop again if it hadn't. So I think you could use it as a tool in that scenario.
Okay.
Dale, is there a way, I don't know if this question is going to make sense. If you're using the automation stuff and you're scheduling something, it shows you when something's running. Obviously, there's just one instance of that in a workflow. You could have multiple instances, but it just makes me think if there's a wait in there, potentially you could have a lot of instances of the same workflow hanging out and waiting, especially if you screwed up and did something wrong. Is there any way of telling like how many workflows are just sitting out there hanging and waiting, potentially either because it's a long wait period or just because you messed up with your code, and you're maybe bogging down the system with a bunch of workflows that have gotten kicked off and are just hanging out?
Not that I'm aware of. I mean, not built in. You build it, but it's not built in that I'm aware of.
And then I assume if I do screw up and code something to be like 2,000 hours instead of 2,000 milliseconds, that the best way to fix that is to just restart the app pool or restart the site or something like that.
Yes, I'm not aware of any way to terminate the wait loop. Yep. When I was looking at that flow wait, I was reminded there is, they put in another one. I think it's called stop. I'd have to look at it, but I was going to show it, but now I got to install dependencies. But there's another one that where you can completely exit out of something. So that's another flow one that's there. I'm going to bring that up, but while I'm trying to do that, if there's anything else on the list that is of interest, we can talk about that too.
Not on your list there, but you talked about it, was the changes to pop-ups with, was it pop-up with
Yeah.
and stop and pop-up and continue, and I didn't quite understand what the new feature was going to be.
Sure. So yeah, the one that I was just talking about was stop execution. So this is a way that you can terminate things if you rather than finding your way to the end, for example, of a workflow. If you've just decided in this particular branch that you're done, you can use stop execution. So that's another flow one that's been there for a while. I was just going to mention. Yeah, so pop up and continue the options. So those make most sense in the standpoint of a form. So I'm going to go take a look at my just a form here. And I don't have a scenario. I don't have one of these set up. So I mean, I can show it, but I don't have it. Where it's working, but we can talk about it. So this was open form and continue, for example. So the new parameters are these, just how the form, how that, when something pops up, how is it going to close? And let's see if I have a pop-up here that,
I think the scenario that drove this was that we had some people being frustrated that that they might be working on the form and then accidentally click outside the form and it just closes. And if the button that opens it reinitializes it, then you lost the data that you entered in the form. So this gives you that possibility that now you can say, well, if somebody clicks outside the pop-up, they can't close it. And it actually gives you control to say that they can't close the pop-up unless a button actually runs an action to close the pop-up. There's no, you can remove the closing X, you can remove escape, closing, and clicking outside the pop-up. If you remove all those, then you have to have an action on a button, and so it gives you more control about how the modal can be closed.
so for the fun of that, I am able to show one here. So we'll do an open form pop-up and stop execution, pointing it to my form. It doesn't matter what this is. So we'll use the default. And so we have this pop-up button. It opens a pop-up. And to Patrick's point, if you just click outside, that thing goes away. And so now whatever data was there got lost. I think
if you're reinitializing the form, so there is the option, you know, for if you know in the pop-up, if you don't reinitialize the form, your data will still be there. But in most cases, you want to reinitialize the form when you open a pop-up. So
let's cover that case. So
yeah,
this we're saying pop-up, it comes up blank. We put in some data, but accidentally click away, and now it's gone. So the pop-up options, if we say the user can't close the pop-up, well, that one takes all the options. We can try that one. So there's a click. I have to refresh it. So pop-up. Huh.
do you have all your updates installed?
Well, that is a great question. So let's turn off clicking outside and see it and escape. Trying to determine if this is an issue for QA to get into. Come on, where is it? Okay, there it is. Pop up. Okay. So this was released apparently as a hotfix in 120, and I've got all my hotfixes installed, but it doesn't work. So let's see if we can try it in 121 and see if it's working. Oh, I don't have a scenario. Tell you what, let's go back to your question, Jim. Do you think does what I've shown make sense why you might want to use it?
Oh yeah, no, I run into that frustration a lot. It'll be a happy day. It usually happens when I'm training somebody new and they get frustrated.
Mm-hmm.
Like, oh, what if I click over here?
Yep. So it's a very real use case to fix things. I wish it had worked when I showed it to you. We'll get into that right after this call.
Yeah.
You know what? I bet I do have. Where did that go? My 121. This one. I've got a customer. Yep, I just installed an update. So of course it takes a minute. So we do new on a customer. This is a built-in action. And so I'm able to click away. So if I were to go and modify the way that this opens the listing, you've got the new button that opens a form, stops execution, and we turn off. I'm going to turn off all of them and see if it works. See, now when I click outside, it doesn't let me go. And if I hit escape, it doesn't let me go. You can see it fluctuate a little bit, so you can tell it's doing something. I would argue that that X button shouldn't be there in the don't allow to close, but reasonable people can argue about that one. But it does work in 121, so that makes me feel good.
I checked on the on our 1.20 QA site as well. It's working there in the testing scenario. So maybe there's something unique to your site, but yeah, we should look into it.
Where did we go here? There it is. We talked about the recommended and critical hotfixes a little bit. Did anybody hear that or want to hear it again? And does that make sense to you the way that we are going to handle that? Anybody want to hear it again? Anybody crying over the loss of MyTokens, the old MyTokens? Long live MyTokens. All right. Oh yeah.
That's a first. Oh, sorry. I was distracted at the last meeting on Wednesday, so this is new to me. Removing the MyTokens UI.
Yes.
So that's for the old one.
Yes. The new one will, the one that's part of this one will continue.
Right.
They do the same things. The old one is very old and was really only maintained from the standpoint of the old DNN Sharp tools. And since it's been retired now for, since we haven't released anything from that since, or supported it since the end of March, then it's just, decision was taken this time to let it go.
Ben, was there anything specific that you were, and do you still use it?
Still use it right now, but that's also because I have older systems that I haven't upgraded yet. I'm in the process of doing it right now. So because I share a lot of code between sites, when I make a change to a token that is a token that I use on all my sites, I just copy it, export it, and re-import it. But on the older sites, since it's not Plantain app, I have to use the old MyTokens. So right now, and basically, if I move up to this version, that basically means that I will no longer be able to do that with the older sites. There'll be a discrepancy, or I'd have to basically make the changes manually as opposed to importing. Just means a little more work for me for now. Not a big deal.
Yep. Okay.
In that scenario, does the new one support the XML export that the old interface did as opposed to JSON?
No, that's the reason why I use it. The old one is XML, the new one is JSON.
Yeah, the new one, when you export, yep, no choice, it exports in JSON. And imports in JSON, and the old one see if I can even find it here. Exports in XML. Yep, so completely different look. So since we're about to come out with another version, I thought I would ask the question, what you think about our pace and process. Do our releases come too fast, about right, too slowly? I guess this is the Goldilocks question. I don't know, and this is me asking, right? This is not, we're contemplating changing the process, but I'm just wondering if every release, I mean, it sends you into a beta test cycle, and I mean, if they're coming too fast, that would be good information. I'm just curious about the pace. All right, I can't provoke any of you today. Jim.
We, as I say, I've only recently left, but we struggled to keep our dozen or so different systems up to date, and we found that the release cycle, there's no way we would be able to keep up with all the point releases. We would move up when there was a feature that was important or a bug that was fixed, because now, as we've said, the moving from development to production is hard. Moving up on upgrading a production environment, especially if you're upgrading DNN at the same time, is quite a time-consuming process to change everything. So very often the new releases are of interest, but certainly not implementing them. Not implementing all of them. We're skipping over quite a few as and when, because it's just a hard process when you've got a lot of environments.
Mm-hmm.
I'll second that. I was waiting for someone else to see if anyone else had that same comment. I didn't want to be the first to say it.
Glad to provide the service.
But basically, a similar scenario here, where we have multiple environments. So when the releases come out, each environment is slightly different, needs to be tested differently, and it's time consuming. So I mean, I like the idea that the releases come out so often, because in a way, it shows that you guys are on top of things. But from a perspective of having to implement them, it's a bit on the fast side for us. Mm-hmm. It's a bit of a heavy lift, because when they come out, then it's a whole situation of, okay, now we have to test everything and make sure it works on all the different sites and whatnot. And we have a lot of SOC auditing and scheduling and basically writing everything down of every update, why we updated it, things like that. It kicks off a whole series of documentation and paperwork that also needs to be done. So if it were to slow down a bit, I wouldn't be opposed to that.
So for people in that scenario that you're talking about, do you, for example, the hotfixes that we release, do you install those, or do those trigger the same level of issue?
The hotfixes would trigger a minor version of it, but it's not as severe. So smaller updates that we can just say, this updates this one little, piece that we need, is a much easier thing to document than when we do a whole entire update and then we have to document all the things that were touched. So mm-hmm. all the different modules and stuff like that. So a full update is going to trigger a much larger documentation requirement than mm-hmm. a hotfix. So I would like to see hotfixes, be something that is quicker released for, bugs and things like that are found. But the full on, release of the entire plant and app structure, that I could, easily go for a slower release structure.
So those of you that are in the other side, I'm going to get to you in a second, but I want to make sure that I cover this one. I was going to ask, so when, and Jim particularly, you mentioned that you might skip until there's a feature that, skip releases until there's a feature that you need. And I'm just verifying your process then, when that comes up, if you were to skip a version or two, you're still using the one-click upgrade to step through the all the versions until you get to the one that you want. That's the process?
That's right. Yeah. Going back to Ben's comment about documentation, doing a fix to solve a problem, something that's broken, is a lot less onerous to get through any bureaucratic process. So hot fixes are fine. when we would do an upgrade, the people who are vetting this sort of thing are largely ignorant of any detail. So we just say we are moving to X. They don't know that we're stepping through half a dozen levels.
They don't care how you got there, just as long as you.
No,
you justify
and typically we wouldn't. But it depends. Yeah, it always depends how many things you're upgrading at the same time. But typically we would step through the upgrade to the end point that we wanted to reach and test then, rather than test all the steps, because although there are a lot of updates, they're not huge updates. So that's one of the reasons for tending to skip things if there's nothing that particularly interests us.
Okay. So now from the other end of the spectrum, who wants to take the standpoint that nope, everything's too slow, we need it faster?
Yeah, definitely daily updates would be great. I don't have enough to do. So if you could push updates every single day, I want to make sure you're doing your work, Dale.
Thank you, David.
I was waiting for someone to say that.
Well, I asked for it, so I mean.
I think a system update, if things were available as a hotfix or a feature that you could install, you wouldn't need the full, like the 121 update. I really want the export entities and things like that. But until you have a script to let me migrate in 122, there's nothing to drive me to put 121 in.
Yep.
And other than some of these other features, which that you just showed, some of the smaller things, if those were available as features I could install, then I would sit back.
Yep. So
I wonder if perhaps if it was slowed down, then the things would be perhaps a little bit more complete, right? If we, instead of having 1.21, we just have the next one was what you're proposing for 1.22 with the entity export and the migration script. So the full functionality that you're proposing to Reese, rather than drip feeding it out partially, if you gave yourself a bit more time and had fewer, more significant, or more complete rather releases, that would be quite attractive.
okay. So this is our Campfire site and the hotfix list for Campfire, and I was just going to take a look, for example. Just kind of to set the stage for my next question about this release stuff. We got Form Builder, and over the course of time, there's been hotfixes, 42, 45, 46, 47, 48, all these different ones. And we've covered this before. If you need this fix to for the script embedded form added to a static, whatever that thing is, installing this, we don't have parts and pieces, we have the next higher version. So if installing 157 gets you all of these other Form Builder ones, there is no pick and choose for hotfixes. So in the scenario where we release where we were perhaps put more emphasis on hotfixes to fix things and less emphasis on a release cadence, full version cadence, does this scenario cause you problems in your documentation world?
From my standpoint, like I said, if we're picking and choosing, it's a lot less documentation because it's only that one module section that we're updating. I do have one little comment / request.
Mm-hmm.
Would this section be able to be reverse sort ordered on version number so that the most recent is the first item? So we don't have to scroll down to find the latest one. The latest one will be the first.
So we're redesigning this, and the idea is that, I haven't seen it yet. We're redesigning it and actually turning it into low code, right? This is, this listing is being generated by our core product, and we're changing this so that it will be a true listing module that's going to show the content. And so version sorting and filtering and things like that will be applied to it, but also there'll be different content showing that, and I don't know yet, and Patrick, you may know, the idea would be that all of these may be incorporated together, that clicking this.
Yeah, so there's going to be, you're going to see, so in this scenario, for let's take forms as an example, you're going to see on the listing forms 5.20.157, and then you're going to see the all those changes from 142 through 157. You're going to see them as all part of 157. But if you want to install, say, 148, there's going to be an option for you to specifically install 148 in a drop-down menu. Where the install button is now, you'll have a drop-down menu there that will allow you to pick an option to install a different version of the, then, you know, instead of installing the latest version, you can choose to install 148. So it's going to be, that's the way it's going to work. But you're going to see that there's forms update, and it's going to allow you the option to install 157 automatically. And but if you want to install a different version, you'll have the option on a drop-down menu. We're also going to allow you to install, select updates that you want to install and install them all at the same time. So that's going to be a big improvement to this interface, is that you'll be able to select specific updates that you want to install and then click install, and it'll result in one compile of your system instead of multiple compiles of your system.
So better, this full amount of choice that we still have here, but in an easier way. And so if you want the form builder, it'll be one line. If you just want to bring it all the way up to date, or if you want an intermediate, it'll be an advanced choice, but you'll be able to get there. So what I'm hearing is that, I mean, my takeaway is, if individual areas got fixed along the way and were released as hotfixes, that would be preferable to a faster release schedule. And I think that scenario doesn't hurt people who are not burdened by the level of documentation that you guys were talking about, but it helps the people who are. So good information. We'll bring that to our product team as well.
And so I don't know, does this, I don't, Dale, if you can go back to that page for just a second. You can sort the version column, but I'm not sure it answers what you're looking for.
Since they're all intermingled.
Yeah.
Intermingled.
Yeah, I was thinking like to have a layered sort. So sort by the feature type, which is the module, but then within each of those, sort it in reverse order of version.
Yeah. I think when we see this interface, that will be the next time to make comments on it. It does make sense what you're talking about. And once we turn it into low code to an actual listing, then the filtering would be on. So if this were that, you could turn on filtering by, I want to see form builder, and then sort it by whatever, and you'd get there. You could get there very easily. But because it's core product, we have less control over it. So as soon as we have that available to show you, I'll bring it in. We'll solicit your comments on it. It's supposed to be part of 121. Okay, and then one of our internal discussions is we're releasing these changes to the hotfix screen. We don't really want to do it as a hotfix. Releasing a hotfix to fix hotfixes is just more than we can bear. Okay. We've come past our hour. If there's anyone that has something they were holding on to and they want to finally get it out, we can do that. Otherwise, we'll hold it till next week. 3, 2, 1. Okay. So with that, I am going to thank you all for coming. I will remind you that in a minute, we're going to do our Afterglow segment, which just means we're going to turn off the recording and you can say anything. You can comment on my hosting style to my face. But thank you all for coming. We will see you again next week, this same hour. Bye.